Something strange is happening in the NFL right now. Something that has league executives scratching their heads, marketing departments working overtime, and veteran superstars quietly wondering how a rookie nobody expected to matter just outperformed them in ways that have nothing to do with touchdowns. A fifth-round pick. Pick number 144. A player most draft experts said would be lucky to make a practice squad. That player just generated more jersey sales than quarterbacks who have been building their brands for over a decade. We're talking $10 million, not from endorsements, not from his father's connections, just jerseys. Fans walking into stores, pulling out their wallets, and buying his name and number in quantities that rival the biggest names this sport has ever seen. Shedeur Sanders wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to matter this soon. And he definitely wasn't supposed to become the best-selling jersey of the entire 2025 rookie class while barely seeing the field. But that's exactly what happened. And the story behind these numbers reveals something much bigger than just one player's popularity. It exposes a shift in how value actually works in professional sports now. A shift that caught everyone off guard. What you're about to hear is going to change the way you think about draft position, star power, and what really drives this league. Let's break down exactly what we're dealing with here, because these figures need proper context to truly understand how insane they are. $10 million in jersey sales for a backup quarterback. A player who spent most of his rookie season watching from the sidelines, clipboard in hand, waiting for opportunities that the Cleveland Browns seemed reluctant to give him. That number alone is staggering, but it becomes absolutely mind-blowing when you realize who typically generates that kind of merchandise revenue. We're talking about the elite tier, the untouchables, Patrick Mahomes territory, Tom Brady levels of cultural dominance, Aaron Rodgers after nearly 2 decades of building his legend across multiple franchises. Those are the names that move 8 figures worth of jerseys in a single season. Established superstars with Super Bowl rings, MVP trophies, and years of highlight reels burned into the collective memory of football fans everywhere. And now Shedeur Sanders has crashed that exclusive club without an invitation. The comparison to his fellow rookies makes this even more difficult to comprehend. Cam Ward was drafted significantly higher. He received more playing time, more media coverage, more opportunities to showcase his talent on the biggest stage. By every traditional measure, Ward should be dominating the rookie merchandise conversation. But here's the reality. Cam Ward would need to sell over 375,000 jerseys just to match what Sanders has accomplished. That's not a slight edge. That's not a modest advantage. That's complete and total domination of the rookie market by a player who wasn't even supposed to be in the conversation. One NFL insider who leaked these figures described the situation perfectly. Pick number 144 has somehow become the best-selling jersey of the entire draft class. The gap between where Sanders was selected and where he ranks commercially is so extreme it almost feels fictional. Fifth-round picks don't do this. They fight for roster spots. They grind through practice squads hoping someone notices them. They become special teams contributors if they're lucky, career backups if things go well. They certainly don't outsell first-round talents and compete with future Hall of Famers in the merchandise game. Yet Sanders has shattered every expectation. Retail reports from across the country paint a picture of absolute chaos. Stores couldn't keep his jerseys on the shelves. The white versions sold out immediately. Fans who wanted the black alternative couldn't find them anywhere because demand completely overwhelmed supply. Websites crashed. Inventory vanished. Retailers found themselves in the bizarre position of turning away customers who desperately wanted to give them money. That's the kind of problem organizations dream about having. No marketing campaign necessary. No convincing required. Just organic, overwhelming demand that exceeded every projection and broke every model the league uses to forecast merchandise performance. The manufacturing couldn't keep pace. Distribution networks were strained. And somewhere in Cleveland, front office executives started realizing they had something on their hands that transcended typical rookie value calculations. This wasn't just a popular player. This was a cultural phenomenon wearing a Browns jersey. And the implications of that reality were about to force some very difficult conversations about how the organization had been handling their unexpected goldmine. Because while fans were emptying their bank accounts to support Shedeur Sanders, the team itself seemed determined to pretend he wasn't special at all. And that disconnect was about to become impossible to ignore. To understand how absurd this situation really is, you need to understand what fifth-round picks typically become in the NFL. They become afterthoughts, training camp bodies, players who fill out the roster during summer practices and then disappear before the season starts. The lucky ones stick around on practice squads, earning a fraction of what the stars make while hoping desperately that injuries create opportunities. The really lucky ones carve out careers as special teams contributors or reliable backups who might see the field if disaster strikes. What they don't become is cultural phenomena. They don't outsell first-round picks. They don't generate headlines. And they absolutely don't move $10 million worth of merchandise before proving anything on the actual football field. When Shedeur Sanders heard his name called at pick 144, the narrative was already written. Talented, but limited. Good college quarterback elevated by his father's system. Benefited from playing at Colorado during the Coach Prime era when every game felt like a national event. Probably wouldn't translate to the professional level. Draft experts dismissed him without much debate. Too small, arm not strong enough. Athletic limitations would be exposed against NFL competition. His college success was a product of circumstance rather than legitimate elite talent. The Cleveland Browns took a flyer on him, a low-risk gamble that wouldn't cost them much if it failed. Nobody expected immediate contributions. Nobody projected stardom. The best-case scenario, according to most analysts, was that Sanders might develop into a serviceable backup over several years. Maybe eventually compete for a starting job if everything broke perfectly. That was the ceiling. A nice career as a second-string quarterback who could step in without completely destroying a team's chances. Nothing more. Meanwhile, other rookies enter the league with massive expectations attached to their names. First-round picks with guaranteed money and organizational commitments. Players who teams had identified as foundational pieces worth building around for the next decade. Those were supposed to be the jersey sellers. Those were supposed to capture fan imagination and drive merchandise revenue. That's how the system works. High picks get hype. Late picks prove themselves quietly or fade into obscurity. But something happened that nobody anticipated. The fans didn't care about draft position. They didn't care what the experts said. They didn't care about arm strength measurements or athletic testing numbers or whatever concerns kept Sanders sliding through round after round. They cared about connection. And Shedeur Sanders had built something with fans that couldn't be measured at the combine. One NFL analyst captured the new reality perfectly when discussing why Sanders would remain on the Browns roster regardless of any other factors. The quote has been circulating everywhere since the merchandise numbers leaked. Sometimes the brand is bigger than the draft position. That single sentence represents a fundamental shift in how NFL teams must evaluate players now. It's no longer sufficient to just measure physical tools and project football development. In the modern league, commercial value demands consideration. Social media influence matters. Cultural relevance carries weight. Sanders brought something to Cleveland that no other fifth-round pick in history has ever delivered. Built in stardom before throwing a single professional pass. A fan base that existed before he ever stepped on an NFL practice field. Merchandise demand that exceeded players drafted over 100 picks ahead of him. The Browns thought they were getting a developmental quarterback project. What they actually got was a ready-made cultural phenomenon, and they had absolutely no idea what to do with him. Which explains why the first few months of Sanders' time in Cleveland felt like the organization was actively working against its own best interests. You cannot understand Shedeur Sanders without understanding the empire his father built around him. Deion Sanders isn't just a football coach. He's a cultural force, a movement, a brand so powerful that it transformed a struggling Colorado program into must-watch television overnight. When Coach Prime arrived in Boulder, something shifted across the entire landscape of college football. Suddenly, everyone was paying attention to a team that hadn't mattered nationally in decades. The ratings exploded. Colorado games drew viewership numbers that rivaled traditional powerhouses. Casual fans who couldn't name 3 college football teams suddenly knew everything about the Buffaloes. Prime time had returned, and he brought an entirely new generation of fans with him. But here's what made the Colorado phenomenon different from typical coaching hype. Deion didn't just revitalize a program, he created a reality show with football attached. Every practice became content. Every press conference became appointment viewing. Every game felt like a cultural event rather than just another Saturday competition. The cameras followed everything. The drama never stopped. And at the center of it all stood Shedeur Sanders, the starting quarterback and heir apparent to the Prime dynasty. For 2 seasons, Shedeur wasn't just playing college football. He was starring in the most watched show in sports. National audiences tuned in specifically to see Coach Prime's son operate the offense. Highlight packages flooded social media after every game. His throws, his celebrations, his interactions with teammates and opponents alike became viral moments consumed by millions. This wasn't typical college quarterback exposure. This was something unprecedented in scale and intensity. By the time the NFL draft arrived, Shedeur Sanders had already achieved a level of name recognition that most professional players never reach across entire careers. People who don't follow football knew who he was. His face was familiar. His story was known. The connection with fans had been established through hundreds of hours of content consumed across multiple platforms. No rookie in NFL history has ever entered the league with this kind of built-in platform. Previous quarterback prospects came with college accomplishments and scouting reports. They came with game film and measurables and projections about professional potential. But they still needed to build their brands from scratch at the NFL level. They still needed to prove themselves worthy of fan investment before merchandise sales followed. Shedeur skipped that entire process. He arrived in Cleveland with a fan base already locked in. Supporters who had followed his journey through Colorado. Viewers who felt like they knew him personally from watching the Coach Prime documentary content. Consumers ready and willing to purchase his jersey before he ever took a professional snap. The Colorado years essentially served as a 2-year marketing campaign for Shedeur's NFL career. Every touchdown pass built future merchandise demand. Every comeback victory created emotional investment that would translate into purchases. Every viral moment expanded the audience that would eventually follow him to whatever NFL city drafted him. Cleveland got lucky. They spent a 5th-round pick and received a player with first-round commercial value. A player whose jersey was going to sell regardless of playing time or performance. A player whose platform dwarfed everyone else in his draft class combined. The Deion Sanders effect gave his son a foundation that money cannot buy. But what Shedeur did next proved he was more than just his father's creation. He proved he could build something of his own that connected with fans in ways even Coach Prime couldn't manufacture. It would be easy to dismiss all of this as borrowed fame. Just another celebrity kid riding his father's coattails into opportunities he didn't earn. Just another beneficiary of nepotism in a sports world that loves dynasties and family connections. But that explanation falls apart when you look closer at what Shedeur has actually built. Because here's the thing about borrowed fame. It fades fast. Audiences can smell inauthenticity from miles away. They know when someone is coasting on a famous last name without bringing anything genuine to the table. And they lose interest quickly when the only selling point is who your parents happen to be. Shedeur Sanders should have experienced that drop-off by now. The initial curiosity generated by his father's fame should have worn thin. Fans should have moved on to the next shiny object once the novelty of Coach Prime's son entering the NFL wore off. Instead, the opposite happened. His following grew stronger. The connection deepened. And the merchandise numbers climbed to levels that suggest something far more powerful than reflected glory. What separates Shedeur from countless other athletes with famous parents is authenticity. Raw, unfiltered, impossible to fake authenticity that resonates specifically with younger generations who have developed sophisticated radar for detecting anything manufactured or performative. His social media presence tells the story. This isn't the typical athlete content that fills Instagram feeds and TikTok pages across professional sports. No generic motivational quotes posted by marketing teams. No carefully staged workout videos designed to project dedication. No sanitized corporate messaging that could apply to literally any player in any sport. Shedeur's content feels real because it is real. He shows personality, humor, vulnerability, moments that aren't polished for public consumption. Interactions with friends and family that reveal genuine relationships rather than calculated brand partnerships. He responds to fans in ways that feel conversational rather than transactional. He shares opinions that sometimes generate controversy because authentic people don't always say the safe thing. This approach carries risk. Plenty of athletes have damaged their brands by showing too much personality or expressing unpopular opinions. The safe path is sanitized content that offends nobody and connects with nobody on a deeper level. Shedeur chose the dangerous path. And it's paying dividends that safe athletes will never experience. Generation Z specifically gravitates toward this kind of authenticity. They grew up on social media. They understand how the game works. They can identify sponsored content, manufactured personas, and corporate messaging instantly. And they reject it with brutal efficiency. But when they find someone who seems genuine, someone who actually appears to be the same person on camera that they are off camera, that connection becomes almost unbreakable. They invest emotionally in that person's success. They become advocates who spread the word organically. They become customers who purchase merchandise not because of marketing campaigns, but because of genuine affection. Shedeur cracked the code that most professional athletes never figure out. He understood that modern fans don't want perfect. They want real. They don't want polished corporate athletes delivering sponsor-approved talking points. They want human beings they can relate to and root for on a personal level. The jersey sales reflect this connection. $10 million worth of fans saying we believe in this person, not this player, not this draft pick, this person. Deion Sanders gave his son a platform, but Shedeur built something on that platform that belongs entirely to him. A personal brand that would survive and thrive even if he wasn't Coach Prime's kid. And Cleveland's front office was about to learn just how powerful that brand had become, because the fans were paying attention to every decision the organization made regarding their favorite player. And they weren't happy with what they were seeing. From the moment Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland, something felt off. The organization seemed almost determined to downplay what they had, like they couldn't quite believe a fifth-round pick deserved the attention he was receiving. Like they needed to prove that draft position still mattered more than cultural impact. So they buried him, not literally, but strategically, deliberately, in ways that became impossible to ignore as the season progressed. Practice reps went to other quarterbacks. First-team snaps were reserved for veterans who had accomplished nothing meaningful but carried higher draft pedigree. Coaches spoke about Sanders in measured tones that suggested patience rather than excitement. The message was clear without anyone needing to say it directly. Wait your turn. Prove yourself quietly. Don't expect special treatment just because fans are obsessed with you. The depth chart became a statement. Sanders sat firmly behind players who generated zero buzz, players whose jerseys collected dust in team stores, players who couldn't move the needle commercially if their careers depended on it. Meanwhile, those same team stores couldn't keep Sanders' merchandise in stock. The disconnect was staggering. Here was an organization actively suppressing their most marketable asset, treating him like any other late-round developmental project when every metric outside of football performance screamed that he was anything but ordinary. Fans noticed immediately. How could they not? Social media erupted with frustration. Why wasn't Sanders playing? What was the organization thinking? Didn't they understand what they had? Conspiracy theories spread about internal politics and veteran players feeling threatened and coaching staffs resistant to change. The Browns had dealt with quarterback dysfunction for decades. Since returning to Cleveland in 1999, the franchise had cycled through more starting quarterbacks than most fans could name from memory. Endless searches for the answer. Countless draft picks invested at the position. Nothing ever worked. And now they had a player generating unprecedented excitement. A player fans actually wanted to watch. A player selling jerseys at rates that rivaled the league's biggest stars. And the organization's response was to bench him. Season tickets became harder to sell when Sanders wasn't starting. Television ratings for Browns games dipped when fans knew their favorite player would be watching from the sidelines. The energy around the franchise that Sanders' arrival had generated began dissipating because the team refused to capitalize on it. Inside the building, tensions reportedly simmered. Ownership watched merchandise revenue pour, and while on-field decisions seemed designed to minimize their most popular players' involvement. Marketing departments understood Sanders' value even if the football operations side remained skeptical. Something had to give. Jimmy Haslam finally intervened. The Browns owner, whose tenure has been defined by dysfunction and poor decisions, recognized what his football people apparently couldn't see. Sanders wasn't just a developmental quarterback project. He was a franchise cornerstone, a player worth building around regardless of where he was drafted. Reports emerged that Haslam had internally confirmed Sanders as the future. Not a maybe, not a we'll see how he develops situation. The definitive answer Cleveland had been searching for across 2 decades of quarterback chaos. Ownership had spoken. The front office received its marching orders. And suddenly, the organizational messaging around Sanders began shifting. But the damage from those early months of mismanagement hadn't been erased. Fans remembered how the team treated their guy when nobody was forcing them to do otherwise. Trust had been damaged. Skepticism about whether the organization truly understood Sanders' value lingered beneath the surface. And one person in particular still needed to prove that his commitment to Sanders was genuine rather than forced. The head coach whose job security depended on getting this right. Kevin Stefanski had a problem. The head coach whose job security had been questioned constantly throughout the season found himself caught between organizational pressure and his own instincts. And for months, his handling of Shedeur Sanders suggested those instincts were badly miscalibrated. His early comments about Sanders were carefully constructed masterpieces of saying nothing meaningful. Measured words designed to avoid commitment in either direction. The kind of coach speak that experienced media members recognize immediately as deflection. He's developing nicely. We're pleased with his progress. He's learning our system. Generic phrases that could apply to literally any young player on any roster in the league. Nothing that suggested Stefanski saw anything special. Nothing that indicated the coach understood what ownership and fans already knew. Meanwhile, his actions spoke louder than his empty words. Sanders received minimal first-team reps. Game planning didn't seem to account for his unique abilities. When opportunities arose to give the rookie meaningful experience, Stefanski consistently chose conservative alternatives. Veterans who couldn't generate a fraction of Sanders' excitement kept getting chances that probably should have gone to the player fans actually wanted to see. The fan base turned hostile quickly. Social media became a constant stream of Stefanski criticism, not just complaints about the team's poor record or questionable game management decisions. Specific anger about how the coach was handling Sanders. Accusations that Stefanski was actively sabotaging the franchise's future because of stubbornness or pride or some personal vendetta that nobody outside the building could understand. Fire Stefanski became a rallying cry. And unlike typical fan frustration that coaches dismiss as noise, this sentiment carried weight because it connected directly to the organization's most valuable commercial asset. Ownership was watching, merchandise money was flowing, and the head coach seemed determined to bench the player responsible for all of it. Something had to change, and eventually something did. The shift happened gradually at first. Stefanski's comments about Sanders became slightly warmer. Practice reps increased. Game plans started incorporating more opportunities for the rookie to showcase his abilities. Then the shift became dramatic. Recent weeks have seen Stefanski transform into Sanders' biggest public advocate. Press conferences now feature glowing assessments of the young quarterback's development. Specific plays get highlighted and praised. Technical details about footwork and progressions and pocket manipulation receive enthusiastic breakdowns from a coach who previously couldn't muster anything beyond generic pleasantries. He's making adjustments at the line that veterans struggle with. His accuracy in tight windows is special. The poise he shows under pressure is beyond his experience level. These aren't empty compliments. These are specific observations that suggest Stefanski is finally paying attention to what everyone else already saw. Whether this conversion is genuine remains an open question. Some believe Stefanski finally recognized what he had. That film study and practice observation eventually revealed Sanders' legitimate talent and convinced the coach that his initial skepticism was misplaced. Growth and adaptation are signs of good coaching, and perhaps Stefanski simply needed time to reach the correct conclusion. Others suspect the change is purely survival-driven. That ownership pressure and job security concerns forced Stefanski to embrace Sanders publicly regardless of private opinions. That the coach understood his future in Cleveland depended entirely on the young quarterback's success, so he made the calculated decision to become Sanders' loudest supporter. The truth probably contains elements of both explanations. But regardless of motivation, the results matter more than the reasons. Sanders is finally receiving the support and endorsement from his head coach that should have been there from day one. The organizational dysfunction that characterized his early months in Cleveland has been replaced by unified messaging about his importance to the franchise. Stefanski's job security now rises and falls with Sanders' development. Their fates are intertwined, whether the coach likes it or not. And recent performances have given both of them reasons for genuine optimism. And then came the moment that changed everything. Aaron Rodgers, future Hall of Famer, four-time MVP, Super Bowl champion, a quarterback whose resume contains every achievement the position offers, a player who had been dissecting NFL defenses since before Shedeur Sanders was even in high school. The matchup seemed almost unfair. Legendary veteran against untested rookie. Decades of experience against months of professional exposure. The kind of game where young quarterbacks typically get humbled and reminded exactly how difficult this league can be. But Shedeur Sanders didn't get that memo. What happened on that field shocked everyone who still believed draft position determined destiny. Sanders completed 75% of his passes, against an Aaron Rodgers-led team that understood the stakes, against defensive schemes designed to confuse young quarterbacks, against pressure that should have rattled someone with limited starting experience. 75%. That's not managing the game. That's not avoiding mistakes and hoping the defense keeps you competitive. That's elite-level accuracy that most quarterbacks never achieve in perfect conditions, let alone against playoff-caliber competition. But the raw statistics only tell part of the story. Watch the film and you see something more impressive than completion percentage. You see a young quarterback who belongs, who doesn't look overwhelmed or intimidated by the moment, who operates with the kind of calm that typically takes years to develop. Sanders stood in the pocket with defenders bearing down and delivered strikes. He manipulated safeties with his eyes, looking them off before firing to receivers in windows that barely existed. He processed information at speeds that suggested his mental clock operated differently than typical rookies. Third and long situations that usually destroy young quarterbacks became conversion opportunities. Red zone possessions that often stall out resulted in touchdowns. The moments that separate professional quarterbacks from college players pretending to be professional quarterbacks all broke in Sanders' favor. Rodgers himself watched from the opposite sideline with an expression that suggested recognition. He knew what he was seeing. A young player who understood the position at levels that can't be taught. Either you process the game this way or you don't. Either you see the field with this clarity or you never will. The throws Sanders made weren't just completions. They were statements. A dart between two defenders that hit his receiver in stride for a crucial first down. A back shoulder fade that dropped perfectly into waiting hands despite tight coverage. A sidearm delivery around a rushing linebacker that found its target 20 yards downfield. The kind of throws that make defensive coordinators throw their play sheets in frustration because perfect execution beats perfect coverage every time. His pocket presence particularly stood out. Young quarterbacks typically struggle with internal clocks. They hold the ball too long or release too quickly. They bail from clean pockets or stand still when movement is required. The feel for pressure and space usually takes seasons to develop. Sanders already had it. He slid within the pocket to create throwing lanes, stepped up when edge rushers got too deep, drifted away from interior pressure without taking his eyes off receivers. The subtle movements that extend plays by fractions of seconds that make massive differences in completion probability. This wasn't just competent quarterback play from a rookie. This was a glimpse of what the ceiling might actually be. And that ceiling suddenly looked much higher than anyone projected when Sanders fell to the 5th round. The football world took notice. National media finally stopped talking about Sanders as just a merchandise phenomenon and started acknowledging his legitimate quarterback talent. The performance against Rodgers became the reference point that shut down skeptics who insisted his popularity exceeded his ability. And somewhere in Cleveland's front office, executives who had been counting jersey revenue started realizing they might have accidentally found their franchise quarterback after all. $10 million in jersey sales represents just the visible tip of a massive economic iceberg. When a player generates that kind of merchandise revenue, the ripple effects spread through every aspect of an organization's business operations. And Shedeur Sanders has created waves that the Cleveland Browns couldn't ignore even if they wanted to. Start with ticket sales. The Browns had struggled with attendance consistency for years. Decades of losing had worn down even the most loyal fans. Cold December games against mediocre opponents became increasingly difficult sells. Season ticket renewals required aggressive marketing campaigns and significant discounts. Then Sanders arrived. And suddenly, those same seats became hot commodities. Fans who hadn't attended games in years started checking schedules. Season ticket packages that previously required payment plans sold out immediately. The secondary market exploded with demand that drove prices to levels typically reserved for playoff games. People weren't just coming to watch the Browns. They were coming to watch Shedeur Sanders, even when he wasn't starting, even when he might only play a few series. The possibility of seeing him take the field generated more excitement than guaranteed appearances by established veterans. Television ratings told the same story. Browns games featuring Sanders drew viewership numbers that exceeded national expectations, not just in Cleveland, not just in regional markets. National audiences tuned in specifically to watch the fifth-round phenomenon everyone was talking about. Streaming numbers spiked. Social media engagement during games reached unprecedented levels for regular season Browns contests. Networks noticed. And when networks notice, advertising rates adjust accordingly. Suddenly, the Browns became a more valuable television property. Games that might have been relegated to regional coverage received national consideration. Primetime slots that usually went to traditional powerhouses included Cleveland in the conversation. The kind of exposure that franchises spend millions trying to manufacture happened organically because viewers wanted to watch Shedeur Sanders play football. Sponsorship opportunities multiplied exponentially. Brands that previously showed minimal interest in Browns partnerships started calling. Not just local businesses looking for standard arrangements. National corporations recognizing the unique marketing opportunity Sanders represented. A young, culturally relevant star who connected with demographics that traditional NFL marketing struggled to reach. The total economic impact becomes staggering when you calculate all these revenue streams. Conservative estimates suggest Sanders has generated somewhere between $30 and $40 million in total value for the Browns organization when you factor in merchandise, tickets, television, sponsorships, and the harder-to-quantify benefits of increased brand relevance and fan engagement. $40 million. From a fifth-round draft pick making rookie minimum salary. That's not just unusual. That's unprecedented. That's the kind of return on investment that changes how organizations think about player evaluation forever. Which brings us to the elephant in the room that nobody in Cleveland wants to acknowledge publicly, but everyone understands privately. Shedeur Sanders has become essentially uncuttable. Not because of his potential as a quarterback, though that's looking increasingly promising. Not because of where he was drafted or how much guaranteed money he received. But because the business cost of releasing him would be catastrophic. Imagine the Browns trying to explain to fans why they cut the most popular player on the roster, the player whose jersey they bought, the player who brought them back to the stadium, the player who made Cleveland relevant in national conversations for positive reasons for once. The backlash would be immediate and brutal. Season ticket cancellations would pour in, merchandise sales would crater, television ratings would plummet. Sponsorship partners would reconsider their investments. The financial damage would dwarf whatever football reasons might exist for moving on from Sanders. This creates a fascinating dynamic that challenges traditional NFL roster management. Teams typically make personnel decisions based primarily on football considerations. Can this player help us win? Does his performance justify his roster spot? Are there better alternatives available? But Sanders exists in a different category. His value transcends traditional metrics. He's simultaneously a football player and a business asset, a quarterback and a marketing phenomenon, a fifth-round pick and a franchise cornerstone. The Browns have no choice but to give him every opportunity to succeed. Not just because it's the right football decision, though evidence increasingly suggests it is, but because the business consequences of any other approach would be devastating. This is the new reality of professional sports that Sanders represents better than anyone. Beyond the merchandise phenomenon and cultural impact, there's still the fundamental question that determines everything in professional football. Can he actually play? The scouting report on Shedeur Sanders paints a fascinating picture of contradictions that explains both why he fell to the 5th round and why he might ultimately prove everyone wrong. Start with what jumps off the film immediately. His accuracy is genuinely elite. We're not talking about completion percentage in clean pockets against soft coverage. We're talking about ball placement that most quarterbacks never achieve. The ability to drop passes into spaces that barely exist. The consistency to hit receivers in stride 25 yards downfield. The touch to layer throws over linebackers and under safeties with margins measured in inches. That 75% completion rate against Rodgers wasn't an aberration. It's what Sanders does when given opportunities. He puts the ball exactly where it needs to be with remarkable reliability. His decision-making process operates at speeds that surprise coaches reviewing game film. Pre-snap recognition comes naturally to him. He identifies defensive alignments, processes likely pressures, and adjusts protections with the calm of someone who's been doing this for years rather than months. Post-snap, his eyes move through progressions with purpose rather than panic. He finds the right receiver, not always the first option, not always the biggest play, but consistently the correct decision based on coverage. The interception rate stays remarkably low for a young quarterback facing NFL defenses. He doesn't force throws into coverage trying to create magic. He takes what's available, moves the chains, and lives to play the next down. That might sound basic, but it's exactly what destroys most young quarterbacks who feel pressure to prove themselves with every throw. His pocket presence defies typical rookie limitations. Sanders feels pressure without seeing it, steps up when he needs to, slides when it helps, escapes when necessary but never prematurely. The internal clock that typically takes years to calibrate already operates at professional speeds. He knows when to get rid of the ball, when to extend plays, when to accept a sack rather than risk catastrophe. Now for the limitations that kept him from being drafted higher. The arm strength is adequate but not exceptional. He can make every NFL throw, but the ball doesn't explode off his hand like it does for quarterbacks with elite physical tools. Deep shots require proper technique and timing rather than raw power. Tight window throws in bad weather might challenge him more than quarterbacks with stronger arms. Mobility exists but won't terrify defensive coordinators. Sanders can escape pressure and occasionally scramble for positive yards, but he's not breaking contain regularly or turning broken plays into explosive gains with his legs. He's a pocket passer who can move when necessary, not a dual threat weapon who fundamentally changes defensive game plans. The physical profile suggests a quarterback who needs everything around him functioning properly to maximize success. Good but not great arm, sufficient but not special athleticism. The tools to succeed without the margin for error that elite physical talents provide. But here's what scouts are beginning to understand about Sanders. The mental side of his game operates at such a high level that physical limitations become less relevant. He processes information and makes decisions fast enough that arm strength becomes less critical. He manipulates defenders and creates throwing windows that don't require perfect physical tools to exploit. The NFL is littered with physically gifted quarterbacks who never figured out the mental side. Cannon arms attached to processors that couldn't handle the speed. Elite athleticism paired with decision-making that crumbled under pressure. Sanders represents the opposite equation. Average physical tools operated by an exceptional mental computer. History suggests that formula actually works better than most people expect. What Shedeur Sanders has accomplished in his rookie season forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about value in professional sports. A 5th-round pick shouldn't generate $10 million in jersey sales. A backup quarterback shouldn't outsell established superstars. A rookie with limited playing time shouldn't become the most commercially successful player in his entire draft class. Yet Sanders has done all of that. And more importantly, he's proven that the traditional metrics we use to evaluate players are becoming increasingly obsolete. Draft position used to determine everything. Where you got selected dictated your salary, your opportunities, your organizational support, and your perceived ceiling. First-round picks received patience and investment. Late-round picks got minimal chances to prove they belonged before teams moved on to the next lottery ticket. Sanders has shattered that framework completely. He's demonstrated that brand power represents legitimate currency in the modern NFL. That social media influence and cultural relevance carry tangible value that shows up on balance sheets. That the ability to connect with fans and drive engagement matters just as much as 40-yard dash times and arm strength measurements. This isn't just about selling jerseys. It's about fundamentally reimagining how professional sports organizations evaluate and invest in talent. The Browns stumbled into this revelation accidentally. They drafted Sanders as a developmental project and discovered they'd acquired a cultural phenomenon. They thought they were taking a low-risk gamble on a quarterback with a famous father and found themselves with the most marketable player in their franchise's recent history. Other teams are watching, taking notes, adjusting their evaluation processes to account for what Sanders has proven possible. Future drafts will see organizations weighing commercial potential alongside athletic ability. Social media followings will factor into draft grades. Personal brands will influence contract negotiations. The ability to move merchandise and drive engagement will become part of the scouting report. Sanders has created the blueprint. Others will follow. But here's the reality that Sanders still needs to confront. All the jersey sales in the world won't matter if he can't deliver on the field. Commercial success without competitive success has a short shelf life in professional sports. Fans who bought his jersey because of who he is will only stay invested if he becomes who they hope he can be. The pressure that creates is enormous. Every struggling performance will prompt questions about whether the hype exceeded the talent. Every interception will generate hot takes about style over substance. Every loss will fuel narratives about the difference between social media popularity and actual football ability. Sanders carries the weight of being simultaneously overvalued and undervalued, worth every penny from a business perspective, but still needing to prove his worth from a football perspective. Generating superstar revenue while fighting for respect as a legitimate NFL quarterback. The glimpses we've seen suggest he can handle that pressure. The performance against Rodgers. The steady improvement throughout his rookie season. The mental processing that operates beyond his experience level. All signs point toward Sanders developing into the quarterback Cleveland has desperately sought for decades. If Sanders becomes even a reliable starting quarterback who wins games and maybe makes a playoff run or two, the return on Cleveland's fifth-round investment will be studied in business schools forever. But even if the football side never quite matches the commercial success, Sanders has already achieved something remarkable. He's proven that modern athletes can create value in ways previous generations never imagined. That personal brands can transcend traditional limitations. That connection with fans matters more than draft position or organizational politics. Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland as pick 144, a footnote in most draft recaps. An afterthought in rookie rankings. He'll leave his rookie season as a phenomenon who rewrote the rules. The kid who wasn't supposed to matter has become the only thing that matters in Cleveland. The fifth-round pick who became a first-round phenomenon. The backup who built an empire before becoming a starter. Whatever happens next, what Sanders has already accomplished won't be forgotten. He's changed the game, shifted the paradigm, created a new model for success that future players will study and attempt to replicate. The NFL will never evaluate talent the same way again. And somewhere Deion Sanders is watching his son exceed even his enormous expectations, knowing that Shedeur has accomplished something primetime himself never did. He's made a fifth-round pick more valuable than most first-round selections will ever be. That's not just special. That's revolutionary. The question now isn't whether Sanders belongs in the NFL. It's whether the NFL is ready for what Sanders represents. A new era where culture and commerce intersect with competition, where brand power carries as much weight as arm power, where being picked at 144 doesn't determine your ceiling if you understand how to connect with people who matter most. The fans who buy the jerseys, who fill the stadiums, who make this entire enterprise possible. Shedeur Sanders understood that from day one, and that understanding has made him untouchable.